Okay, Bulavinaka, welcome to those of you from outside the Pacific, and welcome to everyone listening in, watching in from the Pacific. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to this recording will be emailed in the next 24 hours to those who have subscribed to our newsletter. The South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine is an organization that is dedicated to bringing together individuals and organizations to effectively combat this pandemic of non-communicable diseases that is sweeping across the South Pacific. It seeks to promote the education and training of health professionals in the use of evidence-based approaches to address the root cause of these chronic diseases. So what is lifestyle medicine? Lifestyle medicine, again, is evidence-based. It's the evidence-based practice of helping individuals and communities with comprehensive lifestyle changes. And these include things like nutrition, physical activity, stress management, social support, and environmental exposures to help prevent, treat, and even reverse the progression of chronic diseases by addressing the underlying causes. So we take this opportunity to invite everybody to heaven. If you've never experienced it, you get the opportunity to come on down to Fiji to a beautiful resort called the Pearl South Pacific for the inaugural South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine Conference. And save the date, this is from the 10th to the 12th of March, 2020. So that's the conference. Now, the interesting thing, one of the interesting things that'll be at the conference is certification in lifestyle medicine. And as you can see, it's taking place all around the world. The blue are in places that are yet to actually have it. And so in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that little dot in the South Pacific, that's March 2020. So as part of the conference, we will also be hosting the examination for the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. And as I mentioned, next year, March 13th, save the date, here in Fiji, we will have the first ever conference. And at the end of the conference, the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine Conference, we will have the International Board exams. So with non-communicable diseases now responsible for 70 to 80% of all healthcare expenditure, most health professionals, unfortunately, still treat these diseases the same way they treat communicable diseases, with pills and injections. Now, while this may temporarily relieve symptoms, it obviously is not addressing the underlying cause of the non-communicable disease. And most physicians and health professionals received little to no education on lifestyle changes or lifestyle factors like nutrition, exercise, rest, or even social connectivity. And these are the four main pillars of lifestyle medicine. So learning how to prevent, arrest, and reverse chronic disease in a scientific-based manner is absolutely important. And this is what you get from once you have mastered the discipline of lifestyle medicine from the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. The International Board of Lifestyle Medicine exams, as I mentioned earlier, will take place immediately following the SPSLM conference. So again, that's on the 13th of March, 2020, here in beautiful Fiji. Now, to prepare for the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine exams, we recommend completing the Lifestyle Medicine Board Review course. Now, this is separate from the exams. This course helps you to prepare so that you are, have the best chance of passing the exam and getting the certification. And if you want to learn more how to enroll in the course, feel free to email info@spslm.org. Once again, that's info@spslm.org. And in fact, if you go through some of our previous videos, you'll find that we've just, our last webinar was actually a explanation of the examinations. And it had costings and everything like that. So feel free to check that out as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of introducing to you Dr. Darren Morton. And when Dr. Morton isn't busy jumping out of little floaty planes in the air, he's actually doing a lot of work in educating people on lifestyle medicine. Dr. Darren is driven by a desire to inspire and equip others to live their best life. Originally, he comes from a education background. He's got a keen interest in optimizing human function, and this led him to complete a master's and PhD degree in human physiology. His early research career focused on the runner's stitch, of which he is considered the world expert. And over the past decade, his research has focused on optimizing well-being through the exciting field of lifestyle medicine. To date, he's the author of 3 books and over 50 publications in scientific and medical journals worldwide. He's an associate professor and lead researcher in the Lifestyle Research Center at Avondale College, where he supervises several PhD students and is also on the editorial board of the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Darren is also the course convener for postgraduate studies in lifestyle medicine at Avondale, and one of the 4 people selected worldwide to write the exam for international certification in lifestyle medicine. He's a certified diplomate of the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine and a fellow of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Drawing off his educational background, Dr. Darren's specialty is in the creation of evidence-based lifestyle interventions, and he was a key developer of and is a presenter in the Complete Health Improvement Program, or CHIP, which is a premier lifestyle medicine intervention program targeting chronic diseases that now operates in over 10 countries around the world. His latest creation is the LIFT project, which incorporates evidence-based strategies from lifestyle medicine and positive psychology for improving emotional health and well-being. Dr. Darren has presented to hundreds of corporate, educational, and community audiences around the world, and he's an invited speaker at international academic conferences. He's also been awarded a citation for outstanding contributions to student learning in the Australian university sector, and in his spare time, Darren loves spending time with his family and friends and being active and adventurous in the great outdoors. He loves hand gliding, kite surfing, running, kayaking, mountain biking, and swimming. That is a mouthful. Dr. Darren Morton, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Pata. I tell you what, that's quite an introduction. I thank you for that. I can hardly wait to hear what I'm about to say after that. But hey, let me first of all see if I can get a seamless share screen go first. So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen with you, and then we'll get started. Let me try here. Nope, I don't think that one worked. Wait a sec. Oh, sorry. This did work a moment ago, didn't it? Here we go.
It did, it worked.
We can promise it. All right.
So everybody can close your eyes for the next 10 seconds.
That's right. We will get there, I promise. Oh, here we go. Is that working?
There you go.
Oh, there we go. The crowd.
Yay.
Sigh of relief. Well, that's good. It's actually, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm sorry that took so long. Hey, look, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I just really admire what you guys are doing in the South Pacific and with the society there. So keep up the great work. But yeah, it's really my pleasure to be here with you, and to be talking about this topic from health to happiness. I have a great interest and passion in lifestyle medicine, clearly, because I think that to my mind, it's the future of healthcare, not just in Australia where I reside, but in pretty much all parts of the world, because we're all facing the same crisis when it comes to chronic diseases. But I actually, and I've probably been involved in this space for, over a decade now, very intensely. But I really, to be honest, why do I want people? I mean, we know that lifestyle medicine has the power to, prevent and manage and in some instances even reverse chronic conditions like diabetes, which we know is very problematic in the South Pacific. why do we want people not to have diabetes and not to have heart disease and experience all the ills that come with that? You know, to my mind, it's really because I want people to be living their best life. And so what I would like to talk about tonight is this whole idea that, you know what, going after health and making people healthy is a high calling, and that's such a worthwhile thing. But, you know, you can actually be healthy and miserable at the same time. And so what I think and what really intrigues me and gets me excited is the whole idea that we can actually go beyond just making people healthy. We can actually make people happy. We can make people whole. And so that's really where my focus is. And what we are now discovering, and this is what I'll be sharing with you, is that lifestyle medicine has a whole lot to contribute to that. You see, what we know that is what's good for the body, and lifestyle medicine is incredibly good for your body, is actually really good for your brain as well. And so I want to start with this big idea. And my big idea is this: we need to promote happy brains as well as healthy bodies. And so I'm going to talk about some strategies for helping to achieve that. But before I start, I want to, because it's evening time, I thought it might just commence with an abbreviated story. You see, I love stories. I love particularly children's books. And this is my favorite. This is called Some Dogs Do. And I'm not going to read it to you, but just to give you a bit of an account, and it's worth getting hold of this book. It's fantastic. But this is the story of Sid. So you can see Sid there. And the story actually starts by saying that when Sid set off for school one day, a happy feeling came his way. It filled him up so much he found his paws just lifted off the ground. And without a how and without a why, Sid fell up towards the sky. And so Sid goes on to actually fly to school, and he's quite excited by this. And when he gets to school, he tells his friends and he tells his teacher, who just don't believe him. And they essentially rob him of his happiness. And when they tell him that he needs to put it to the test, he has a go, but his happiness had gone by then, and he actually can't fly anymore. What's insightful about this story is that when Sid has quite a dejecting day, he's not very happy, he goes home and he participates in these sorts of behaviours. And I'll return to this in just a moment, but you look what Sid is doing, or perhaps we should say not doing, and you know, he's actually, there are two things going on there. But anyway, the story ends well, because I know that we all like happy endings. So Sid actually discovers a little while later that in fact his mum and dad have kept a secret for him, from him, and that is that they can fly. And it makes Sid incredibly happy, and he then discovers this ability to fly once again. And so the book ends by saying, you know, well, is it true? You know, do dogs fly? And it says, well, some dogs don't, but some dogs do. And what I love about this story is I think it has a really powerful moral. I actually remember reading this to a group of university students one time as part of their graduation speech that I had to deliver. And I said, what's the moral of this story? And someone put up their hand eagerly, and I said, yes. And they said, well, your parents keep secrets from you. And I went, whoa, that's not quite the moral I was after, but yes, that's correct. They do probably keep secrets from you. And then another student put up their hand, and I said, yes, thinking they'd redeem this situation for me. And they said, your teachers don't know what they're talking about. Because, of course, one of the teacher and Sid's teacher had said that it wasn't possible. And I thought, well, that's not quite the moral I was after either. But this is the moral that I would like to propose. And that is that how you feel affects whether you fly or fall. And look, I spent a lot of time in this space looking at essentially how we can put people in a better place emotionally. Because what we know, and regardless of what sort of area or domain or discipline you look in, there is actually really good evidence to suggest that people's emotional states influences their motivation levels, it influences their behaviours, their health, it influences their performance in a whole range of workplace endeavours. In athletics, it's the same. Often the mark of a champion is not that they're necessarily physiologically gifted, but they have this real ability to manage their emotional state. We know in education, when we actually help kids to feel better, that they actually perform better academically. And so there's a lot of research now going on just showing that there's so much value to helping people to be, or putting people in a better place emotionally. And that's what intrigues me. And I think in the pursuit of, helping people live their best life, well, then, you know what, people need to feel better. And so what we definitely know is that people's emotional state has a pronounced effect on their health outcomes. And it actually does this for two reasons. The first one is that it affects people's health behaviours. And we all know this to be the case. So just to return to this slide from the story Some Dogs Do, the actual wording for this slide is it says, and when at home with mum and dad, deep inside, Sid still felt bad. Poor Sid. And so what do you see Sid doing? Well, it's quite classic here. I find it quite insightful. Jez Albo, who wrote the book, he has Sid eating essentially, processed food that's probably not in his best health interest. And in terms of physical activity, he's doing none. He's actually sedentary. And so I think this really is quite insightful, because I know, from a personal perspective, and I'm sure that you do too, that this is often the way it goes. When we're not in a good place emotionally, it's very easy to default to poor health behaviours. It was interesting, my children are all teenagers now, but when they were younger and I read this book to them, I remember getting to this page one time and said, do you know what it's like for Sid right now? And my kid said, yeah, I know exactly what that's like. And I said, well, why don't you draw me a picture? Just, what you think happens for you. And so, or maybe a better, representation of what it might be like for Sid. And so this is one of my children. You can see that Sid is still sitting. That's correct. He's being sedentary, but is it just 3 cookies that he's consuming? Well, not at all. There he is. It looks like he's got a bucket of lollies beside him. Not a bag, but a bucket. The cake looks like about as tall as Sid, and there's a pizza there as well. And I really like this. This is from my youngest child. You can see that the Sid is there once again, sitting there watching television. Looks like there are 3 pizzas up the background there. There's some McDonald's I can read. And what's truly disturbing about this particular picture from my youngest is that it looks like Sid is now chugging on a Cuban cigar. So really Sid has hit rock bottom here. But I think it illustrates this point. And of course, you're all wondering, well, how did your child learn about that? So anyway, we'll move on from there. The point is that we know that people's emotional state definitely influences and affects their health behaviours. It's hard. We can recommend to people to eat better, to move better, to sleep better. But the problem is when people are not in a good place emotionally, those behaviours become very difficult or more difficult to follow through on. And so in the interest of promoting positive health behaviours, then we really need to be caring for people at an emotional level. But there's another reason as well why your emotional state can influence health outcomes. And as we're all very, very familiar, what we know, from a physiological point of view, is that your emotional state, there is this strong connection between the body and the brain, and the brain and the body. And your emotional state has these direct physiological effects. So as a classic example, my country in Australia, please come and visit, but just be aware that there are things that will hurt you over here. We seem to have a lot of these, disproportionate number of these things, but we've got crocodiles, we've got kangaroos, even our friendly kangaroos that everyone thinks, oh, they're just lovely animals. Well, they're really good at kicking as well. And what I can tell you is that under both of those circumstances, being chased by a crocodile, which I'm yet to do, but or being kicked by a kangaroo and chased by one of them, which I have participated in, either of these things, they actually dial up, obviously, autonomic responses that have far-reaching body implications throughout our body. And we're all familiar with this. We can actually monitor these, we can map these. But what's interesting is one of the things that we're discovering is that these physiological effects can be truly far-reaching. For example, they can even affect things like our immunosurveillance and byproducts of that, like things like like wound healing. I'll touch on this study. I find this one is, to my mind, one of the classics. I sometimes, as I'm reading the literature, I think to myself, how on earth do they get participants to volunteer for this stuff? And this was one of them. Researchers from the University of Ohio, Janet Kaiser, who's a psychoneuroimmunologist, very leading pioneer in this space. So they second married couples to come into their laboratory and they would administer blister wounds to the forearm of these husband and wife, which using a standardised instrument. And then what they're interested in is how long those wounds take to heal. On the first occasion, they bring this couple in after the wound is administered, and then they have a counselling session. And on the first instant, the counsellor is there essentially to evoke warm fuzzies. And so what happens is they talk about, where do you go on holidays, and what fun stuff do you do together, and where did you meet? And after about half an hour of this, the room is aglow, and everyone's holding hands, rocking backwards and forwards, singing "You Light Up My Life." And so this is a happy time. They send them on their way, and they watch to see how long these wounds take to heal. Next time they return, a few weeks later, after the wounds have healed, they re-administer the blister in another spot on the forearm, and then this time they take them in, and what the couple don't realise is that the counsellor is actually going to pick a fight. And so the counsellor asks questions about how the husband feels about the wife's spending habits, and he asks the woman how she feels, whether she feels that her husband is emotionally available to her and communicates well, and that's usually enough to start a fire. And then the counsellor essentially lets this burn and then sends them on their way. And what we see under those sorts of arrangements is that those blister wounds administered just immediately before the argument will take about 30% longer to heal. And these studies have been replicated in dental students. And so what we know is that there are very profound physiological consequences of our emotional state that influence things like how we heal. So to state it simply, how we feel affects how we heal. Now, we have known for a long time, and this is probably, that probably a study like that comes as no surprise to many of us, because we've known for a long time that your emotional state, when people are down, for example, depression, is certainly comorbid with a range of other health outcomes. For me, one of the first times I became aware of this, or not aware of it, but I think really impressed by this, was probably 15 years ago when I first saw this study that came out by Yusuf, published in The Lancet. And what they were looking at here is the effect of what factors drive myocardial infarction. And it was a very large study, well done study in 52 countries, called the Interheart study. And I remember looking at this table for the first time, and sorry that this is a little bit busy and might be a little bit difficult to see, but what it actually showed is the odds ratios of the different factors and the different predictors, essentially, or determinants of myocardial infarction. And what was interesting to me, if you look at things like their psychosocial status of these people, this was actually almost as big a predictor as things like whether they were smoking. And certainly it was more predictive than things like their fruit and vegetable intake, their exercise level, their alcohol intake. And so what really hit home for me is that, what we know, that there is really good evidence within the lifestyle medicine space that people's emotional, psychosocial status is having a profound effect on their disease progression. So here's the question then. Is it that your emotional state, like for example, feeling down, actually drives poor health outcomes? Or could it be, and here's the corollary to this, could it be that actually positive emotional states actually are driving positive outcomes? Not just the absence of the negative, but could they actually be driving positive health outcomes independently? And there is some evidence coming through that this is indeed the case. So, this paper here by Robert Veenhoven, who talks about healthy happiness, and in this review, he actually includes this. He says, the effect of happiness, this is positive emotional states. The effect of happiness on longevity in healthy populations is remarkably strong. And, he sort of indicated that the size of the effect is comparable to that of not smoking, or smoking or not. And what's intriguing, there are some quite fascinating little fun studies, I think, that actually hint at this as well. One of the classics in this space is the famous nun study. And what researchers did, they conducted this research in 2000, so a little while back now. But what they did, these researchers, they up the autobiographies written by about 180 nuns who had entered the convent back in the 1920s and 30s. And when you enter the convent, just in case you're thinking about it, you will be asked to write a short bio sketch, of what you've been up to, what your hopes and dreams and aspirations were for the future. And what these researchers did is essentially they just analysed the tone of the writings. Were they upbeat? Were they sort of quite optimistic, or were they a bit sort of forlorn and a bit pessimistic? And then they came back, and so in the year 2000, they said, well, what percentage of nuns, actually make it to the age of 93 years? This is what they found. Of the least happy nuns, as indicated by their early writings, of less than 1 in 5 were making it to 93. Whereas, the most happy nuns, and perhaps in this instance you might call it the most scary nuns, over half of them were making it to the age of 93. What's interesting, and obviously nuns make for a very interesting and convenient study cohort, because what we know is that they practice a lot of the lifestyle practices that they have are common. So it removes, for example, their diet is quite similar. Often their movement patterns are quite similar. They don't smoke. They don't do drugs. Those things are frowned on in the convent. And so some of those confounding effects to longevity are somewhat controlled for. So this is interesting that that people's emotional state, even in younger ages, younger years, seems to be related to longevity. And that's not the only study that's found this. And obviously, I'm just cherry picking a couple of fun ones that I find quite fascinating. But this was another study conducted by researchers who dug up the baseball cards for 250 odd Major League Baseball players from 1952. And all they did is they analysed to see how much of these people smiling in their photograph. And you think, really? That's all they did? Well, probably, the extent to which you smile in a photograph is somewhat a surrogate for maybe how smiley you are most of the time, how happy, how upbeat you might be. And so they analysed to say, could the extent to which someone's smiling influence or be related to their longevity, be associated with that? And so the answer is, in fact, it is. And so the guy on the left, I've got some bad news for him. He really probably needed to get his affairs in order. Whereas the guy on the right he's performing what we call the Dashin smile. So he's showing the pearly whites, your cheeks are slightly raised, your face is a little bit excited. And what the researchers found is that the Dashin smiles in the photos, on average, were living about 7 years longer. And, once again, these are quirky little fun studies, but it's something to ponder. When you consider that, we know that when people, for example, become more physically active, they'll probably add, around about 3 years to their life, 2 to 3 years. When people eat a more nutritious diet, they'll probably add about the same. If they don't smoke, it'll be about the same. You can probably add, somewhere between 7 to 14 years to your life by practicing an array of positive lifestyle choices. And yet, perhaps just by smiling in photos, 7 years. Well, why wouldn't you do that? So, I know that I can't hear you right now at the other end of the line, but this is a little bit of help, okay? So hopefully you're smiling right now, and see if you can continue to do this till the end of the presentation. So, once again, to refer to Veenhoven, he makes this comment: the effect of happiness on longevity in healthy populations is remarkably strong. The size of the effect is comparable to that of not smoking. And so he makes this interesting point. And he says, what this means is essentially that public health can be promoted by greater happiness of a greater number. And, I think obviously we need to be very real in this space and acknowledge that no one can be, over the moon cheery 24/7. I mean, that's just not life. We have circumstances in our life. There are times when we will feel low. And, it's even appropriate to feel that way at certain times. But what my absolute belief and conviction is, and my research would suggest this to be the case too, is that most of us, most of the time, can probably be taking a couple of steps up the happy ladder, if you like, if you want to call it that. And you know what? There are tremendous benefits for doing that, none the least of which is positive benefits on our health and well-being. And so, public health can be promoted by greater happiness for a greater number. And so I come back to my big idea here is that, hey, we need to get intentional about promoting happy brains, not just healthy bodies, as important as that is. So here's the question then: is it possible to be happier? Well, I want to just make a short comment on the word happy, first of all, because even when we put this in the title of this webinar, there may have been some who are going, oh, happy. Maybe you're not the ones that did that. Maybe the ones who went, oh, happy, they're the ones who didn't show up this evening. But often, happiness we can think is a little bit trite, a little bit fluffy and without substance. And I just want to make the point that, when we're talking, I use happiness as a term that, we can relate to, but it's not that sort of very surface level, superficial kind of fleeting feeling. What we know is that when it comes to happiness, if you want to give it that term, it's really a lot more comprehensive than that. There are probably two domains if you wanted to sum up, what happiness is. It has hedonic expressions and, obviously, relating to hedonism, but, that's where often people think of happiness. It's like feeling good, and feeling good, as we've already seen, is really important, but it's also, having lots of other positive effect. So for example, joy, peace, these kinds of measures as well can also be markers of what we call subjective well-being or happiness. Satisfaction with life, is another marker of happiness. So we have these hedonic expressions, but there are also these other entities we refer to as eudaimonic well-being or eudaimonic happiness. And this is where we're starting to talk about having a strong sense of purpose in life, having a sense of autonomy, self-acceptance, having a growth mindset. Ikigai, that's a Japanese term for, essentially that relates to having a reason for being. And we know that all of these things come together to promote things like optimism and hope and vitality. And I love that word vitality. In fact, in this, there's a budding space which I'm very involved in, and that's trying to bring lifestyle medicine and positive psychology together. And the word we often use is vitality, which I think really, and emotional vitality, which I think really sums up things nicely. So I suppose I show that slide to make the point that, when we talk about is it possible to be happier, happiness is not just that fluffy feel-good feeling. It's bigger than that. It's more significant than that. So what the science actually indicates, if we were to ask that question, is it possible to be happier? Well, yeah, indeed it is. What's intriguing is that, current estimates suggest that, in fact, when it comes to people reporting how they feel their enduring happiness is, not their moment by moment happiness, because obviously if something bad happens or we just rolled our ankle or whatever it might be, we might be up and down, and we're all doing that in terms of our mental well-being throughout the course of the day and weeks. But if we talk about what's our enduring level of happiness, it seems that there's quite a strong genetic component to that, possibly up to 50%. I would argue, and for those of you familiar with the emerging science of epigenetics, I would argue that that's an overinflation. I think that nurture is probably playing a lot bigger part than nature in this space. But what the studies also suggest, which I think is really intriguing, is that our life circumstances, for example, our wealth, our work, our relationship, specifically whether we might be married or single, they actually seem to contribute a whole lot less to happiness than what most people might imagine, probably around about 10%. And this is why we know that, for example, in developing countries where people, are relatively poor, they can still report very high levels of happiness and life satisfaction. What's intriguing is that 40% they estimate, but I would argue that it's greater than that. About 40% of our enduring happiness we get to control through our intentional activities where we can actually feel better, we can feel happier. And of course, why wouldn't we want to do that? We all live with the pursuit of being happy. So it's a worthwhile cause, particularly given, and this is the statistics that sadden me, is that we know that many people are not feeling like they want to feel. If you wanted to talk about are people happy? Well, if we use some of the markers, we know that, for example, in Australia, this is the Australian statistics, about in 10 adults are taking antidepressants each day. And, obviously medication has a part to play in this. However, what this is a sign to me is that many people are not feeling like they want to feel. They're not happy. They're not satisfied with their life, and they're looking for solutions. And if you want to sort of, the statistics sort of suggest too that in a year, probably about 20%, so 2 out of 10 people are going to experience some sort of mental health crisis. At the other end of the spectrum, which is a great place to be, probably only about 20% of people report that they're flourishing in life. And then there's a good chunk of people, probably around about 60%, 6 out of 10 people in the middle who wouldn't necessarily say they're down, but they're not up either. And so I think, there's this massive need for people to be given evidence-based strategies and help to be put in a better place. There's an interesting paper, this was published in the Medical Journal of Australia a couple of years ago, and they wrote this. It was called it was titled The Unfulfilled Promise of Antidepressant Medications, but this was their conclusion. They said antidepressant medications still have an important role in the treatment of moderate to severe depression. But I like this, and we're seeing this same message just being more and more overtly stated. They said they should be provided as part of an overall treatment plan that includes psychotherapy and lifestyle strategies to improve diet and increase exercise. And you know what? That's a really welcoming message. So essentially what it's saying is that, and this is a space that, that I'm very intrigued by, is that this whole idea of, what we need to do is start prescribing happiness. We prescribe many other things. Maybe we need to start prescribing happiness, being intentional about that. As I said, my big idea, helping people to achieve happy brains, not just healthy bodies. And it turns out that there are actually 2 disciplines which have really grown in concert and are making a huge impact around the world, and that is lifestyle medicine, and that is positive psychology. And there are some excellent evidence-based strategies that are coming out from these 2 fields that are providing strategies to help people feel better. And so I just wanted to go through, and I want to move through quite quickly some of these things, but I think it's really exciting time. So here's the first one. Food feeds your mood. So I've got some little catchy sayings that might help you remember some of this content. I was, as Dr. Partey pointed out, I was involved in the development or redevelopment, and I'm a presenter in a program called the Complete Health Improvement Program, or CHIP, which is actually now operating in around about 20 countries around the world, which is a real exciting thing. Essentially, CHIP was a program developed to target physical chronic diseases, so heart disease, type 2 diabetes specifically, and it achieves incredible outcomes. We see within weeks of people going on the program, it's quite an intensive therapeutic lifestyle change program, but within weeks, people have to have their blood pressure medications lowered because they're becoming hypotensive, or they have to have their diabetic medication lowered because they're becoming hypoglycemic. Angina pain, goes away, sometimes disappears within a matter of weeks. So it's incredible. What interests me, and it's estimated there's been possibly up to about 80,000 people worldwide that have done these CHIP programs, and the Lifestyle Research Centre that I'm based at here, we publish a lot of those outcomes, and we've probably produced about 35 papers or so now in medical journals documenting the outcomes. What's interesting to me is that we will consistently get feedback from people saying, hey, you know what? I know this is helping my diabetes, or helping my blood pressure, or helping my hypercholesterolemia, but I just feel better. You know what? My brain, it's like a fog has lifted off my brain. And it's really interesting for me that how many people would use that kind of terminology. It's like a fog lifted off my brain, and I feel better. And so there were actually some studies done, and what we found is that this program that is, and I should say it's a nutrition-driven program, so it primarily focuses on food, and in particular a plant-based eating pattern. What we were finding is that there's a study published now showing it actually was relieving depressive symptoms. And this intrigued me. And what we've found now is that there is an increasing amount of evidence to show the link between food and mood. In fact, Professor Felice Jacka heads up the food and mood research clinic at Deakin University in Melbourne in Australia. And she's done some great work, including randomised controls in this space. And we definitely know that food has a major impact on people's mood states and can be used to actually help to treat depression. And so there are some really interesting studies, like this one here. This was done in the UK. And they were looking at, is there a link between the consumption of fruit and vegetables and psychological well-being, or happiness, if you want to call it that. And this is what they found. They found that happiness and mental health or mental well-being rise in an approximate dose-response way with the number of daily portions of fruit and vegetables. So, they're using fruit and vegetable consumption as a surrogate of, people's eating patterns. But there's this link here. And essentially what they found is that around about 8 serves of fruit and vegetables per day seem to confer optimal happiness benefits. Now, of course, that's only an association. So could it be that, people who eat more fruit and veggies are happier, or just that happier people eat more fruit and veggies? Because as we've already indicated, being in a better place emotionally probably drives positive health behaviours. And so these researchers from the University of Otago in New Zealand, they actually did a study where they tracked people over an extended period of time, looking at their essentially fruit and vegetables consumption or plant food consumption, and their experience of negative and positive effects. And what they found is that fruits and vegetables predicted improvements in positive effects, not the other way around. But there was a day lag in this. And so essentially what they found is that when someone eats better one day, more plant foods one day, they're more likely to be happier the next. And you think, really, why a day lag? Well, you probably already guessed it. It's got to do with the fact that you have gut bacteria. And what we now know is that there's this intimate relationship, as you would be well aware, because this is one of the fastest moving areas in health, medical research as well, is this intricate connection between our gut, microbiota and our body. We live in a symbiotic relationship with these things. And in some ways, the gut's being referred to as your second brain. And what we know is that your gut bacteria, they love to feed off fibre, and fibre is found in whole plant-based foods. So maybe we need to start thinking more intentionally about prescribing that. Maybe this, not just for physical health, but maybe for mental health, mental well-being. Maybe people need to be going after 8 fistfuls of fibre a day, found obviously in fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans. They're the fibre champions, by the way, and then whole grains as well. So food feeds your mood. That's what we're discovering from lifestyle medicine. Number 2, motion creates emotion. What we definitely know, and this I'm a big fan of exercise, and this one just grieves me, these statistics, but if you look here at the green lines, this represents the downturn in the average movement patterns of the average adult over the past 100 years or so. So you can see that coming on around about sort of 1960, 1970, we started to get all these modern conveniences, the computers and internet, and what we saw is our physical activity levels just fall away. And the shape of the curve doesn't look good, does it, towards the end there? What this indicates is probably there's been a downturn of somewhere around about 60 to 70% reduction in the average energy expenditure of the average adult, which is like walking about 15 kilometres less every day. Now, this is tragic. And obviously, we know that physical activity, and the evidence for this is very, very strong. Physical activity is probably one of the best things we can be doing for our brain, and certainly for our mood state. We know that exercise is probably the most powerful and yet least utilised antidepressant we have available to us. And one of the messages I think is really important here is that you actually don't need to do that much of it, and it doesn't need to be that arduous. So, for example, this study here found that you can actually achieve improvements in vigour, fatigue, and total mood after about 10 minutes of just moving. And so, I've actually started to really move towards encouraging people, who are not up for exercise, and many people hate that word exercise, to just move more, and just try, and if you can get out for 10 minutes, just move, and the more dynamically you can move, the better. What we know is that will make you feel better. And, who doesn't want to feel better? And I think that's quite a positive message that people need to hear. So there's something else we can prescribe, and that is that, we're encouraging people, hey, just move. We know that standing is better than sitting. That's why I'm standing at my workstation right now. Walking or moving is better than standing. The more that you can do, the better. But hey, it doesn't need to be long, doesn't need to be hard, doesn't need to be arduous. But in Australia, we had a saying that one of our national campaigns for physical activity was exercise. You don't need to take it seriously, you just need to take it regularly. And I think it's a good message. So, getting people to move in this way is really, really important. So, food feeds your mood, motion creates emotion. This one here, I think that we don't talk about sleep enough. And it excites me that at many of the lifestyle medicine conferences now, we're hearing more and more about sleep. Because, we know you need to rest to feel your best. We all have felt like this at times, and I think that you'll concur that when you do feel like that, you're not full of the joy of living, and your mood state certainly suffers, and often the mood state of those around you suffers as well. We're all guilty of this. And what we know is that when people are sleep deprived, their limbic regions of their brain, amygdala, for example, are actually on alert. We know that people are more inclined to react in negative ways and see the negative. I'll give you this is a little experiment for you. I'll give you a few seconds just to remember as many of these words as you can. Go. I would ask Dr. Partey just to supply some background music whilst you're doing that, just some quiet singing, but probably by the time he takes the mic, it will be over. So then I'll just blank that. Oh, you were close. You almost got there. So here's the point. How many words can you remember? Well, actually, that's not the thing that's really of interest to these researchers. What they're interested in is what type of words do people remember? And what you may not have noticed there is that some of those words are quite neutral, like tree and water and carpet. Some of them were quite positive in their orientation, like calm, happy, love, smile. And others were a bit negative, like grief, snake, crash, alarm, angry. But what they know is that when people are sleep deprived, they're about 2.5 times more likely to latch onto the negative words and remember them. So, our brains are geared towards negativity when we're sleep deprived. Obviously, one of the key contributors to sleep insomnia and sleep disorders in our time is modern light, artificial night. They say that about 99% of the world is exposed to night light pollution now. And so, this is a major problem, and particularly blue light that's emitted from these screens, as we all know. So, maybe we need to be intentional about prescribing. Often we run experiments where we get people, we just say, we want you to be in bed for 8 hours for the next few nights. Don't care what you're doing in there, but don't have a screen in front of you and just spend the time in there and see what happens. And it's quite interesting how people report feeling better after a few nights of that. The other one is quite intriguing to me is, for thousands of years, we've been sitting around fires at night. That was our source of light, which we know is, yellow, its tinge on the red, the yellow-red end of the spectrum, as compared to the opposite end, which is the blue. As you know, as you would be aware, that blue light that comes from screens essentially excites our suprachiasmatic nucleus and tells us that it's time to wake up. And so it's a little wonder why so many people who spend time on these blue screens at night, have problems sleeping. Firelight doesn't do that, doesn't have that effect, actually, winds us down. So we actually get the university students where I'm based, we actually get them to do this as an experiment, see how it works for them. It's quite powerful. So you've got to rest to feel your best. I've ticked off, food feeds your mood, motion creates emotion, rest to feel your best. I'll just share with you one more that comes from the lifestyle medicine space. And that is blue and green should often be seen. And essentially what this relates to is the importance of people getting outside into natural environments. I find this a really interesting study, once again conducted in Auckland, in New Zealand, where they actually found that there was a strong association between how close people lived to these blue and green spaces and mental health. And essentially what they found is that for every 1% increase in the amount of green space close to their home that they spent time in, there was a 4% reduction in depression and anxiety. And so, and the science here is really starting to emerge. Nature, we need to be outside, particularly in bright, sunlit places. Inside spaces don't seem to do it for our brains. We obviously be familiar with conditions like seasonal affective disorder or SAD that are normally only seen at high latitudes in the winter months, but many of us now are spending so much time inside, separated from nature and daylight, that we can actually evoke this. So I think it's also something to be intentional about. So blue and green should often be seen. What about prescribing something like this? You know, hey, I want you to go outside for 30 minutes during daylight hours whilst the sun's shining, ideally in the morning, and just go outside. And I'll tell you what I often say to people is, hey, while you're out there, why not go for a walk? Because walking averages, that's a double bonus then. So I am going to run out of time, but what I want to have introduced is this whole idea that maybe we need to be more intentional about helping people to achieve happier brains and not just healthier bodies, which is obviously incredibly important too. I've touched on some of the things that are emerging from the lifestyle medicine space. There are many other things that are coming from the positive psychology space as well. And I find this a really intriguing environment and discipline, and that where they're discovering things like, what you focus on affects how you feel. And so encouraging people, for example, to practice gratitude. This is incredibly powerful. There's studies that show that when people get more intentional about, writing down things they're grateful for, things that are going well, things that they're hopeful for, it actually can shift their mood state and their happiness in quite powerful ways for extended periods of time. Gratitude is, in fact, in the positive psychology space, is one of the most commonly used exercises. And what we know is that when people practice gratitude, it actually shifts their focus from what they don't have to what they do have. And that can be incredibly uplifting. The other thing that's really coming out of the positive psychology space is the whole idea that that service, have people having a sense of, they're contributing, that they have a worthwhile contribution to make, is very, very important for people's mental well-being. And so the little catch cry I like to use here is, if I can get onto it, is this: it's giving is living. And what we know is that when people operate in a space where they are they're connecting with their give back, their why, if you like, it develops a strong sense of meaning. We introduced that term ikigai later, a little bit earlier, that the Japanese use, and it's true. It's that sense of why, what you're about, your contribution to make, and I think that maybe we need to get more intentional, even as healthcare providers, about connecting people with that, right? Having a sense of why can make all of the difference. And so I return to this, just to conclude, I return to this point that, as healthcare providers, lifestyle medicine, and I love this discipline, it has so much to contribute, and I honestly do think it's the way of the future. It does a lot about helping people to achieve healthy bodies. And, when people get new energy level and get their life back in that way, it's just an incredible thing to be part of. But you know what? There's this other thing that lifestyle medicine does too, particularly if it's complemented by positive psychology, and that is it actually helps people feel better. What an incredible thing to be part of. So my big idea, we need to be intentional about promoting happy brains as well as healthy bodies. And if we were to do that, then what we might find is that not just some dogs do, but more dogs will. And so, thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Darren Morton. And is it okay for us to stop smiling now? My muscles are getting sore. All right. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for signing up to this to listen to this webinar. We thank Dr. Darren Morton for taking time out of his very busy schedule to talk to us today. So we're just going to promote again one more time the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine Conference, and we're going to be having more of these webinars. So if you haven't signed up, www.spslm.org. You get our newsletter. You get to hear about the amazing things that people like Darren Morton are doing in the Pacific and around the world. So please sign up to SPSLM, and we hope to see you here in the South Pacific in Fiji in 2020. Now, if you got your fancy phones, feel free to take shots of this QR code, and it will direct you directly to the SPSLM website or the SPSLM Facebook page. And if you're going to Facebook, please click like, and you'll become part of our mailing list. So once again, from beautiful Fiji, good night, God bless, and we'll see you next time.